G'day, folks. Today I'm going to cover over 25 years worth of AFL trade and list management knowledge in one video. And I'll be coming at it from an angle of, as a big market team, how you can most effectively build your list and to do so to a level that really no other AFL club is doing currently. And I'm going to take it mostly from the angle of Collingwood, given Craig McRae's recent comments, which has sort of, I guess, stimulated my interest in the topic around really targeting established players over draft picks. So you can see his comments here where he's all about bringing in, I guess, established players, and that he really just wants to, I guess, as a philosophy, build via the trade period rather than via the draft, which I'll tell you right away is a viable strategy, but there are some disclaimers around how to do it, and there's also some processes that Collingwood could certainly improve if they want to do this effectively. So to start out in going through some of the key trades we've had over the years, well, actually, I'll start off by mentioning this as well. So before anything, this is my philosophy when it comes to the trade period and the draft. So for me, I look at the trade and free agency period as your opportunity to fill any list needs. So if you've got any needs, that's your opportunity to do so. And if there's any list needs that you suspect won't be able to be filled during the trade and free agency period, which there's always going to be some, but what I'd be looking to then is mature ages, and I'd be scouring the state leagues and looking at, well, who can I get either late draft or as a rookie who can really fill that need to an AFL standard. And for those that actually do follow the state leagues, you'll know that across the state leagues, there's lots of players who are AFL quality, but really the key is finding the correct role for them to really play at AFL level. That's the key. But moving on to Collingwood and analysing some of their past trades to really guide us into, well, what's an effective strategy? So we've had here, firstly, we had the Adam Treloar trade, which was a big one. This was obviously when Collingwood acquired him. And to do so, they had to use 2 first-round picks. And the 2 first-round picks, you'll notice, is a bit of a theme here, and one which I really want to draw to your attention. So here we had, this was the trade that brought Dane Beams back to Collingwood. And for me, it was one that I questioned in the immediate of it happening, where ultimately giving up both, again, a first round pick and a future first. That was a bit of a question for me, particularly when you had the likes of a Jared Lyons who would go on to play about 100 odd games for Brisbane. So my view during that off season was they were of comparable standards, and why would you pay 2 firsts for a Dane Beams? So then we've got Lachie Schultz, and here we've got a first rounder and then a second rounder. So that's still quite a lot to pay, and he's obviously not of, I guess, the reputation necessarily of a Treloar or a Beams. And of course, Collingwood gave up Ginnivan for really, if you look through this trade package, not a lot. So we do have to consider opportunity costs, where obviously you want guys on lesser salaries and you obviously want to be bringing in sort of better quality picks rather than obviously giving out really high quality first round picks and often multiple first round picks when you're not really meaningfully upgrading. So there's some of the things to consider there. And of course, then we had the trade out of Treloar and the trade out of Grundy. So during this period, so Ned Guy was the list manager of Collingwood, and I guess the failing at the time, which Collingwood, to their credit, have, I guess, improved upon, is they were giving out contracts that were substantially too large for, I guess, the caliber of footballer. And when you're a premiership contender, you almost want to be giving out lesser salaries in the hope that you can really bring in, I guess, more talent and more good talent from opposition teams if you do want to, I guess, have the strategy towards bringing in opposition talent. So they're absolutely key ideas there. So credit to Collingwood for getting that contractual element right. But what we're still seeing, of course, if we look at the more recent trade periods, particularly with the Schultz one being the most recent, is, well, they're still really willingly giving up the first round picks. And my problem with those sorts of things is this. So this off season, well, you've had Christian Petrarca available and you've had Bailey Smith available as 2 really key players, 2 high-end players who I suspect, if Collingwood had the trade assets available, would have actually nominated Collingwood. So when talking about these, I guess, high-end guys who would require 1, if not 2 first-round picks to acquire, you really need to, I guess, save up those first round picks. And that's the thing that Collingwood's been missing, and I think will be the next stage in that evolution of understanding around list management, where when you're a destination club, and this is the key point, if you're a destination club such as Collingwood, where you'd be the number one team that players want to come to, where you get the biggest crowds every week, you're a premiership contender, well, okay, you really need to make sure you've got those first round picks available so that if you've got a Petrarca or someone of an equivalent ilk who fills a list need, can really improve your list dramatically, that they've got those picks available. So my immediate advice to a Collingwood or a similar club is do not trade first rounders. If anything, collect them, and even more importantly, collect future first rounders so that you do have that flexibility in upcoming trade periods where you do have those assets available, where you can make those big trades to get those big players when they do request those trades. So they're real keys here. And the types of trades that I'd be going for are such as these. So Darcy Cameron, obviously a great get, didn't have to pay up much for him, and that's often the case with Ruckman. And it was the same when Collingwood traded Jared Witts back when they of course had Brodie Grundy, who was rising, and you couldn't really play both in the same team given they're both, of course, pure Ruckman. So you can always look during the trade period for Ruckman who are undervalued and won't cost the world. You never have to pay a first rounder, or you shouldn't have to, because you can get higher level ones, such as a Darcy Cameron, for next to nothing, and they're around every off season. So you usually don't even have to develop your own. So that's a hint there. So you don't need to go early draft. You can develop some from rookies or late picks if you want to, if you think they're likely to develop and exceed their draft pick. But ultimately, yeah, you can always look in the trade pool and look for those who are undervalued and underutilized on opposition lists. So that's a real opportunity there. Of course, Bobby Hill, another good one. At the time, I actually thought it was quite a lot to spend. But again, the key, and this is the improvement we've seen from Collingwood, is that they're, of course, giving out lesser size contracts or taking on lesser size contracts, really understanding that contractual element being so critical to bringing on future talent and bringing in more and more. So that's certainly a good component there to what Collingwood are doing. And then, of course, we've had the Tom Mitchell trade where, look, with Ollie Henry, unfortunate loss. And, of course, if you could have one of he or Mitchell, you'd take Henry. But, look, Mitchell was still a component to the premiership team. So I guess that still matters at the end of the day. So, yeah, ultimately, you do want to, I guess, have that salary cap management component in mind, and also that first round pick, I guess, orientation where you don't want to be trading off those first rounders unless it's really for a superstar. And the other thing as well is if you don't like the first round pick in this year's draft, well, you can always move it to next year's draft, because there's always going to be teams that are going to want to trade into this year's draft and have a particular target in mind. So yeah, that's always another opportunity where often you can actually get a better pick in the next year's draft, and having that flexibility as a destination team, I think is even more valuable than actually using the pick in the given draft, assuming equivalent valuations. So there's some things to keep in mind. And the club I want to draw to your attention next is actually Geelong. And a lot of what Geelong has done is what a Collingwood or equivalent destination team need in place if you're going to go all in on the strategy towards really going after opposition players rather than going through the draft to build your list. So again, my view is it's completely viable, and Geelong have actually been the club to achieve it. And Geelong are actually probably the most instructive team to look at in terms of draft process, and actually probably the most interesting of all. So looking firstly at their 2007 list and how they built, well, you can see with the 1999 draft, all these key names picked, and I would say the same as well of this 2001 draft. Huge components of their core, really key players drafted. So obviously Geelong got all their drafting right, or at least a good portion, so much so that they were able to build an incredible list at that time. But what has been even more revealing is this, and this is the component that's really relevant to us today in this analysis looking at list management. So as I was saying at the start, if you really want to be looking at, I guess, those mature age opportunities to fill those list needs that you can't during the trade and list management period, So let's have a look at some of the mature ages Geelong have secured over the years. And to give you a hint, no club has done it better than Geelong over the span of years. And we can even go back to the last 20 years to see exactly how well they've done. So now on to the relevant part. So I've got the list of mature ages. And look, I was going to go through the list, but to save us time, I've just made a notepad and I've stuck in really the key names that are particularly instructive. So Matthew Egan, Matthew Stokes, Harry Taylor, Shane Mumford, James Podsiadly, Mark Blitzarves, of course, was a steeplechaser coming over. So different process there, admittedly. Sam Menegola, Tom Stewart, Tim Kelly. Of course, Kelly later traded, and of course the picks received in return, well, they were instrumental in getting Jeremy Cameron, equals premiership, of course. So that mattered. Darcy Fort, congratulations on the premiership. So premiership player with Brisbane. So he turned out to be a handy depth player and really on that basis makes this list. Tom Atkins, Brad Close, Tyson Stengel, delisted free agent, but of course was really good in the sandful after getting cut, and then of course got the opportunity with Geelong. Got Mullen, so Ireland, and then in the most recent draft we've had Sean Manor and Lawson Humphreys, both of whom look very good, capable and comfortable at AFL level, even under finals pressure, to the credit of both of them. So basically, if you look through this list, you've got really key players, and I would say this of Geelong, their actual drafting from even, you can say after 2001, their junior drafting I'd actually say has been pretty poor. But because of their mature age drafting, they've actually had the best draft results of all clubs during the span of the last, whether you want to call it 25 years, you can even say post 2004, Geelong still have been the best drafting team. Even though prior to that, of course, they were doing well with their junior ID, but really from 2004 onwards, it's really been the quality and caliber of these mature ages that have mattered, and I would say have mattered even more so than the players that they've brought in over the years via, whether it's trade, free agency, whatever the case may be, via opposition lists. So if you've got that opposition talent ID, you're bringing in good opposition players, and then you're getting your mature age recruitment right as well. And you can see with all these players and where they were picked, they weren't early picks. You were picking them for the most part either late or rookie, and they've turned out to be really phenomenal footballers. And of course, Geelong have also drafted some other mature ages who haven't been as nearly as successful. Some may not have made it, or whatever the case may be. But here are some of the keys with mature age recruitment and why I value it so highly. So you're bringing in someone who typically is a lot more mature and wants it more than a kid who's just coming out of the under 18s, where they realize the magnitude of the opportunity and they realize that they have to really perform and put their head down really quickly and really early. So from a club culture perspective, that's terrific. Additionally, you'll find that if you really look through these names and really think about their career trajectories, a lot of them have improved at a substantially faster rate than their junior counterparts. So not only are you bringing in, for the most part, more established and better footballers from the get-go, but you're also bringing in players who, while they're a bit older, they actually develop to an even greater degree to become even greater players. And when looking through these names, they're not exactly low-ceiling players. A lot of them are All-Australians, a lot of them are premiership players. These guys are all legit players who have really been different, mate, because the vast majority of them. So, and some of the emerging ones could possibly get to that stage. So it's really been incredible seeing the sheer quality of players here that have really mattered over the years. And on ESPN, I wrote an article which may be of potential interest, where it's about Geelong's mature age success. So you can have a look through that in your own time if you wish. But yeah, to go through the key, I guess, ideas and I guess takeaway messages. So I've summarized it into 6 key points. So the trade and free agency period is for filling list needs. The draft is for picking the best available player. If you don't understand that, you don't really understand list management. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of AFL clubs that don't really understand this concept. And they'll go into the first round picking who they feel will best address a list need. Well, unfortunately, over the years, there's been lots of opportunities lost as a result of doing that. And that's really been quite unfortunate. So, and hopefully it's a lesson that those clubs that have been doing that learn from. Next lesson, don't trade first round picks unless it's for a superstar. So again, I'm not saying this is applicable to all clubs. I'm saying this is applicable in the case of the absolute destination clubs such as Collingwood. Different processes apply for different clubs in different situations. But for a Collingwood, when you're really contending for a premiership, you've got an all-in process approach towards, hey, we want to bring in players and establish players. Well, mature ages is one way of doing it. But if you're really going to go through the opposition talent pathway, well, you really want to make sure that you've got those first round picks available so that you can actually deploy it when there is actually a really high caliber player, such as a Petrarca or a Bailey Smith who wants to come across. And I would say even more important, don't trade future first round picks because they have that additional utility of value of, well, if there isn't necessarily that Petrarca available this offseason, well, hey, at least next offseason, if there is somewhat of that sort of caliber who does become available, well, we've got those picks available where we can have them really available as trade chips ultimately. So that means that you're a much more viable destination. Whereas a Collingwood this year, well, of course, having traded away this year's first round pick in the Lockie Sullivan trade, well, there's not that ammunition available to really be a player for a Petrarca if he does want to come across. So that's really what you have to understand there, or a Bailey Smith or whoever the case may be. You might want to come across who's a name and would legitimately be a difference maker. Point number 4, trade first for future first when the valuations make sense. So to give you an example, let's say Collingwood I'll make up a number and say pick 10 in this year's draft if they were to, of course, have a pick. But let's say they had pick 10. Well, if there's a club who projects to be a bottom 8 side next year, then it might be viable to potentially trade for that sort of future first for that sort of bottom type team, particularly if they're likely to pay overs to really try and, I guess, get up to the pick in this year's draft that you're currently holding. So if you can get that future first with some sort of other pick upgrade or other types of bonuses, there are ways where you can really chip away and have that opportunity, because there's often going to be clubs who are willing to overpay in a given draft year because there's a specific player on the table who maybe you've got pick 10. Well, they might see someone who they have number 2 or 3 on their draft board potentially, and they're really willing to greatly overpay. So they might be able to throw in really quite a bit more than you'd expect. So under those sort of scenarios, really, I guess, have that flexibility available to make those trades back to future drafts, because there is potential really there within that to then really have that greater flexibility and greater opportunity in future off seasons. Point 5, manage your salary cap, avoid big and long deals, and get discounts where possible. So you really want to, I guess, get down those years, get down those dollars, so that you do really have those opportunities to, I guess, have that additional flexibility. So list flexibility and available cap space is everything. So if you don't have salary cap space, well, you can't add the talents that you'd like to bring in. So you really want to make sure you've got that money. Yes, if you go longer term contracts, maybe there's a bit more negotiation power with the money. But then again, you can get into bad contracts more with those longer deals. And that's the thing I would suggest really avoiding more so, because otherwise you're trading away, whether it's a Grundy, whether it's a Traw, where they're on far too many years and you're paying part of their salary. So for me, really, the years matters a lot regardless. And I'd say that's the case really in any club situation. So I would have that really as something else in addition to just really bringing down that salary cap number in a given year as well, because it really is about that flexibility component in equal parts with that availability of cap space. So that would be sort of how I would justify and explain that there. Point number 6, mature ages help with filling list needs, giving immediate competitiveness / urgency and salary cap relief. So again, when you're bringing in mature ages, you've typically got guys who are pretty motivated, realize their opportunity to impress is pretty short if they're not performing right away. So they're typically really going to come in with a greater level of application and urgency than you will a kid from the under 18s who understand, okay, we've got a contract, I've got a few years to impress. And they might sort of, I guess, develop that maturity over time. Whereas with the mature ages, usually they're coming from quite a way back. Maybe they're later developers potentially, or whatever the case may be. And they're just really appreciative of the opportunities. They'll come in, they can fill a need. So it's a great way, obviously, if you've got a few list holes, you can fill a need when you can't, obviously, during the trade and free agency periods. And also as well with those mature ages, well, you're getting a level of performance that really exceeds their salary cap hold. So really the more of them you can bring in who actually do fill those roles to an AFL standard, well, that's going to be absolutely huge for a list build if you're, again, going after that immediate competitiveness. And you can, as with these Geelong examples, where you can have a James Podsiadly coming in age 28. Well, he still plays 100 plus games and really is a huge factor in that build. You can even go as early as first round, get a Harry Taylor. There's so many scenarios. You can get a Tom Stewart, pick 40. Well, he's been Geelong's best player since he's been drafted by them, basically. He's been that level of difference maker. Tim Kelly, amazing. You've just had so many really good players. Tyson Stengel, he was a delisted free agent. Well, he's been incredible since they've got him. So there's so many players. Shane Mumford, he was one of the best ruckmen in the comp. And with what I think was Geelong's last rookie pick in that year, well, again, phenomenal. So you can get incredible value players. And there's a perception around mature ages having a lower ceiling. Well, look at these names. They're not low ceiling players. You've got some really high ceiling players. Again, you've got all Australians on this list. Again, Tom Stewart, best player on Geelong's list, has been for a number of years. So if you can get that caliber of player, there's not really that... I know there's the perception around lower ceilings, but really, again, you can get that increased rate of improvement from mature ages than you do from kids out of the under 18s, again, with that more advanced game as that starting point. So again, on that lower salary cap hold, absolutely fill up your list with mature ages. You get really the same, I guess, quality you can get from those sort of bottom of opposition list type players. So absolutely scat your opposition lists and really, I guess, take on those opportunities. But make sure at the same time you're not neglecting the mature ages from the state leagues, because, hey, there's, as we can see just with Geelong as one example, and Hawthorn, of course, during their competitive era, they were another team that did a really amazing job with bringing in mature ages as well. So it's absolutely one of the absolute key difference makers with regards to list success and successful list management. And of course, with Geelong, having had all these mature ages over the years, well, having all these opposition players coming in from opposition lists, well, they've actually been able to manage their salary cap really well. And how they've done that is they haven't really been taking on all these first round picks and then having to pay on perceived potential. So at the end of the day, and bringing in, say, if you're getting a 30-year-old from another team, well, usually you're actually going to be able to get them for less than their current level of performance, because usually you're anticipating some level of degradation with their level of performance in upcoming years. So absolutely bring in older players to get that, I guess, improved salary cap management. And then obviously with the younger players, well, if you don't have too many first rounders, or really, I guess, young players who have this perception around their potential, well, that's actually going to help your salary cap management. Whereas you can look at a Gold Coast or GWS, you've got all the first rounders in the world. Well, guess what? You're going to lose half of them over time, because you're not going to be able to fit them all in your salary cap. Whereas the Geelong, you get all these mature ages in, you keep trading for established players and opposition lists, and they're not going to have any trouble with bringing in more players over the years, because ultimately, well, you're not really getting in all these guys on potential who you're really having to overpay to retain ultimately once they get onto their second and third contracts. So that's been really some of the magic with Geelong, and part of, I guess, what I'd be saying is a key ingredient in actually, I guess, building that sort of, I guess, successful, sustainable list via opposition talent, and the other component, of course, being those mature ages to, again, fill those list needs and do all that. So hopefully you've learned a bit from this video. I've really hopefully covered off what are the key points. I don't think top of mind I've really missed anything. So and if there's any, whether it's trade scenarios you're interested in, players I've got opinions on, I'm happy to provide them in the comments section below. I did consider a trade video where, look, I'd be covering off on who are some of the players who should be traded, who should be looking at other opportunities, who might not necessarily fit at their current club, or who might be the best fit where. But I just sort of figured this year, look, this is what I wanted to do. A lot of the players already, we know roughly where they're going to be going anyway and all that. So given that, I didn't feel it was super necessary. But yeah, absolutely, in the comment section below, let me know some made up trade scenarios. And I'm happy to give my thoughts around whether a player fits at a certain club under their game style or what have you, and whether certain trades should happen. But anyway, folks, see you on the next one.